Hello and welcome to another video from Another Knitted Thing. Today we are going through the Jeffrey jumper and how to knit it, starting with the cast on and the 2x2 rib. So the 2x2 rib just means 2 needles working and 2 needles out of action across both beds that we're working on. So here you can see I've set up my needles with 2 needles working and 2 needles out of action on the back bed or the main bed, and then I'm going to do the same on the ribber attachment as well. So 2 needles working and 2 needles out of action. Just making sure that those needles in action are in the gaps or the spaces where the needles are not working on the opposite bed. So here's a close-up and you can see that where I have those needles on the front bed working, on the opposite bed they are in those recess spaces where those needles are out of action. This is the knitting position and we need a different setup for the cast on. So I'm racking my bed one step to the right and placing it into half pitch so my needles are interlocking. So this is the knitting position and I'm moving into half pitch and racking it once for the position that I'm going to work with for the cast on. Again, so you can see here, the needles are interlocking and they're not in their own spaces. This is to cast on. And then once I've cast on, I can rack out back into my 2x2 needle position by placing the ribber position from half pitch into full pitch and racking once to the left as well. To start the cast on, I'm going to drop my stitch size down to 1. You can make it as small as you like. Putting it onto 0 scares me a little bit. I'm going to make sure that I've got my ribber attachment and my main bed knitting normally. And I'm going to take the carriage across for that very first row with my needles in that interlocking position. And I'm going to create that zigzag setup row with the yarn. Once I have that zigzag, I'm then going to raise up my comb from underneath, place the wire through, and I'm then going to hang the weights onto that comb, ready for the next steps. The next step, I'm going to do 2 rows of circular. So to put my carriage into circular, I'm going to put my main cam on my main carriage into slip, and that right hand side lever will come towards me and that left hand side lever will go away from me. On the ribber attachment, I'm turning that left hand cam off. This then means that when I'm taking the carriage across to the right hand side, I'm only knitting on the front bed, and then when the carriage returns to the left hand side for the second row, I'm only knitting on the back bed. Then I can turn my carriage back into normal knitting on the main bed into 0. I can leave the side levers as they are, return that main carriage back into working on both directions, turn up my stitch size just slightly up to tension 3. I'm also going to then rack my needles into my main 2x2 rib position by using the pitch position and the racking handle. And then I can take my carriage all the way back across and I have finished my cast on. My cast on is now complete and I can just continue knitting my rib for as many rows as the pattern states, whether that is the main rib for your hem or the rib for your sleeves. Just be careful of the end stitches on both the front and the back bed, and you can add a bit of additional weight if necessary. Once I've completed the rib, I now need to transfer those stitches into a 1x1 rib position for the main structure of the body and of the sleeves. Therefore, I'm transferring the right hand stitch of those front bed pairs over by 1 needle to create a 1x1 rib structure on the main bed. And then on the back bed, I'm also doing the same. However, I'm just making sure that where I transfer those stitches, I'm not then transferring them into a needle position where those needles are directly opposite each other on either bed. Therefore, for this time, I'm transferring that left hand stitch over one place to the left, and you can see that I then have a 1x1 rib position, so 1 needle is working and 1 needle is out of action on both the main bed and the ribber attachment across both beds. This is the 1x1 position for the full cardigan structure that we'll be working on next. How to make full cardigan stitch. So we are going to start the full cardigan stitch by turning that main cam on the main bed into tuck. I'm then going to make sure that right hand side lever is towards me and that left hand side lever is facing away from me. On the ribber attachment, I'm going to click that bottom lever into the tuck position and turn off that left hand cam. I'm going to make sure that right hand cam is towards me and we are good to go. This basically means that whenever I take the carriage across, in this first instance going to the left hand side, I'm tucking on all of those front bed stitches and I have knitted on all of those back bed stitches. So I've got a tuck stitch on the front bed and a knit stitch on the back bed. Then when I come across to the right hand side, I have done the opposite. So in this instance, I have then knitted through that tuck stitch and the original stitch on the front bed, and I have created a tuck stitch on the back bed. Increasing over the sleeves. I will be using an adjustable transfer tool for this increase, and this is set to working a 4-point transfer tool. This is adjustable in the sense that if I wanted to, I can bring every single transfer point out and it becomes a 7-point transfer tool. However, with this pattern, I'm getting rid of every other transferred prong to make it into a 4-point transfer tool. This makes it really easy for me to then, just sort that last one out. Just making sure they're nice and straight. This makes it really easy for me to transfer 4 needles at one time. And because this is a 1x1 needle setup, I don't have any transfer tools in the way where those needles are out of action. I essentially have created a 1x1 transfer tool for the job that I needed to do. I'll pick up those 4 stitches from those needles and I will transfer them out by 1 needle, hook onto those fresh needles and wiggle all those stitches onto those new needles. And I have increased on one bed by 1 stitch. I absolutely will then do this on the opposite bed as well, because you need to increase on both beds at the same rate. Therefore, picking up all of those those stitches with the 4-point transfer tool, wiggling those stitches onto the transfer tool and transferring them across. Finding those new needles and repositioning those stitches back onto the needles. With the opposite end, I then have these empty needles where I transferred away from. So I'm going to fill these needles up. So I'm not going to have a full lace hole. I'm just going to be filling them up. And I'm going to get the heel of the stitch of the needle next door on the back bed. It's a little bit tricky because you do have those tuck stitches there as well, but just make sure you get that heel of the back bed and transfer it across into that empty needle. And then on that front bed, I'm just going to pick up one of those floats from the tuck stitches and fill that in. That just means I can immediately start building up those new stitches on that front bed once the carriage works across and I'm already knitting on that back bed working with new stitches. If you don't have a 4-point transfer tool or an adjustable transfer tool, it is not the end of the world, because you can use the standard 1 and 3-point transfer tools which come with your machine. In this instance, with the 1-point transfer tool, I will just transfer every single stitch that I need to across by 1 needle. So here you can just see I'm picking up 1 stitch at a time with the 1-point transfer tool and transferring it across by 1 needle. It does take a little bit of time, but you can see I've transferred all 4. And then on the opposite bed, if I have the 3-point transfer tool, I can use that, because that middle point of the 3-point transfer tool will just be working into a complete empty space. As you can see, the 2-point, you can't get 2 stitches at once, whereas the 3-point transfer tool, I can work 2 stitches at once. So therefore, I'm just reducing the amount of transfers that I do overall. Even if you hook onto that middle needle, it doesn't matter, because there is no stitch on it. You can just put that out of action and forget that it was there. So you can transfer 2 stitches at the same time with the 3-point transfer tool, and then same again. Come in with the 1-point transfer tool, pick up that heel of the stitch below, pop it onto the empty needle on the back bed, and then pick up one of those floats of the tuck stitch and pop that onto the needle on the front bed, and then again knit as you were. Under the arm decrease. So this first decrease is just to cast off on either side once we have reached our full width for the sleeve, and I'm going to be casting off 2 stitches on both the front and the back bed. We've got tuck stitches on the back bed, so I'm going to start just by knitting through both of these needles, the yarn of the tuck stitch, to create full stitches. So I did that on the last stitch, and I'm just taking that tuck stitch and just knitting it through to create a stitch. And then I'm going to transfer those fully formed front bed stitches over to the back bed. So I then have 4 stitches on one bed that I'm going to cast off. This just makes it a little bit easier than swapping between the 2 beds to cast off at one time, because you've then got all of those 4 stitches that you're casting off in total on that back bed. Then cast off as you normally would. However you prefer to do it, this is just a transfer tool cast off, but if you want to do the latch tool cast off, then you absolutely can. This is just completely up to you. And once you've cast off 4, we can then take off that little bit of material that we still have on our sinker posts. And we're done. Then do it on the left-hand side in exactly the same way. The central neck decrease. So this is just a decrease right in the center of that neckline, where we are going to cast off a number of needles, in this instance 6. And that is going to be the start of our neck shaping. So we're just going to cast off, and then after that we're going to shape the neck on either side of the knit. I'm just bringing into, not into action, but I'm just sort of taking point of where those 6 needles that I need to cast off are. And I need to remember that I'm also going to be transferring those front bed needles over to the back bed and casting off those as well. Rather than casting off over both beds, you can if you want to, but I just find it easier to transfer those front bed stitches over into the back bed, and then I'm only dealing with one bed when I'm casting off. As a start off, I'm then going to drop those needles out of action that I've transferred so I can start to see the shaping, and I'm going to come in and just double check those stitches that I'm casting off, so making sure that they are those needles that I need to cast off the 6. And just remember that needle placement where we want those end stitches to be on the back bed. So I need to transfer those additional needles on the front bed over to the back, and I've got my full number of stitches to cast off here, keeping those end stitches, as you can say, in the needle placement for the full cardigan structure, making sure that the first needle working on either side is on the back bed. I'm then going to take a length of the yarn and start casting off in the middle of the knit, as you can see here, just starting from that right hand side. That is because I'm right-handed and I prefer to cast off, generally speaking, from the right to the left. It doesn't matter which side you work from, but I'm now working all the way across, casting off that central neck decrease. Once I get to that very last stitch, cast that one off. I can then take all of that knit off, and I can also secure that end stitch as well. Neck and armhole decreases. Similarly to the increases, this will be worked with a 4-point transfer tool from my adjustable transfer tool. So I have it in a position with every other transfer point working. That means I can pick up 4 stitches at one time and simply transfer them in by 1 stitch on the main bed. And then again, putting that empty needle now out of action. And then again on the front bed, picking up 4 stitches, including those tuck stitches as well, and transferring them in by 1 needle, wiggling those stitches on. It's a little bit more bulky when you've got those tuck stitches, but you can get those on. If one needle goes past, if the latch goes past the stitch, just rehang them, especially because we've got those latches, those tuck stitches, then we're good to go. If you're working with a 3-point transfer tool or the 1-point transfer tool, it's exactly the same method as the increasing. With the 1 point, just transfer every single stitch individually over by 1 needle. Or if you're working with the 3-point transfer tool, you can transfer 2 stitches at once by using the 3-point transfer tool and hooking onto 2 needles and ignoring that middle point because there's nothing there for it to catch onto or transfer, and you can transfer 2 stitches at the same time. Linking the neck trim. So this trim is a sandwich trim, and that is because we're going to be sandwiching the main body of the neck in between this sandwich trim or the rib. So we have a little bit of single jersey knitted in between the rib, which gives some really nice stitches to try and find. And you can see it's a folded rib, so it's folded over, and that will give a really nice edge on the neck. We're going to be doing this on the machine just to show you in case you don't have a linker. I would normally do this on the linker, but if you don't have one, I'm just going to show you how it goes onto the machine. So I'm going to start with the neck trim facing, so the right side of the neck trim is facing away from me, and I'm going to pick up those last stitches, or the first row of stitches, I should say, of the white wool, and I'm going to pick them up with the transfer tool and rehang them onto the needles. So the base of the neck, the base of the trim is facing up away from the machine. If you can't use your transfer tool and it's getting a little bit fiddly, as I found, you can just pop those needles through the stitches. It's relatively easy to do, and you want to do that across the whole way of the neck trim. I tend to find it easier to start somewhere in the middle and then work outwards rather than working from one side all the way across to the other. Once that is done, right side facing you, you are then going to rehang that neck onto those needles. It doesn't really matter how, as long as you just put one side on and then the other, and then you work your tension in between so that you're not starting on one side, stretching across to the opposite shoulder, and then you've got loads to ease into the neck trim. I do one side and then the other, and then I can find my ease in the middle. And this, because we're not doing point to point across those stitches, if you need to rehang a stitch at any point, it's quite easy to do so. So I'm just using my transfer tool just to rehang that neck onto the needles, and then we're going to fold it over. So there you can see that we're sandwiching that cast off and that shaping row of the neckline in between this rib, and we're going to refind that last row of the stitches. So you can see here, these parts of the stitches here. So I'm kind of looking in between the upside down V shape, and those are what's going to go straight back onto the needles. So I'm using the transfer tool to poke through those stitches and then finding that needle and then just bringing it through the stitches. It is a little bit fiddly. It does take a little bit of time, so just take your time with it. But this is a really easy way to do if you don't want to hand graft it, you don't want to sew that neck trim on by hand. You can link it together on the machine. Just take your time, just make sure you find every single one of those stitches, and as long as your waste yarn is a really contrasting colour to your main yarn, then you're going to find those end stitches much easier. Once that's all rehung, I'm then just going to bind all of this off with the latch tool. So a latch tool bind off, and I'm just going to make sure that each time I pass that latch tool or a needle through the bulk of the material, that I'm making sure that latch is closed. Sometimes that latch can get a little bit caught on a part of the yarn or a part of the stitch. So it's just easy just to make sure that you manually close that latch before you either take it through with the needle or you bring that latch tool back through to complete that little bind off that we've got going. This is also the method that I would do to construct the main body of the garment. However, you don't have this bulk on top with the neck rib, you just have the seams on back onto the needles, and then you can do a much easier latch tool bind off. So if you don't have a linker to construct the main body and the sleeves, you can just re-put it onto the machine and latch tool bind it off. Once this neckline is off, you can see on the front side you've got those running stitches, and on the back you've got that chain stitch exactly like a linker. So I believe that's everything you need to know about the Jeffrey jumper. If there are any questions, please just put them in the comments. I'll try and get back to you. Otherwise, enjoy the pattern and let me see the results.